Okay, welcome. This is B Shifter, John Vance here. And today on the B Shifter podcast, we have Nick Brunacini, Josh Blum, and Chris Stewart is joining us for the first time. Chris is recently retired from the Phoenix Fire Department, but like most of us, doesn't really do well with sitting around. So he's now deputy chief at another department and continuing on his work with teaching people fire command and also involvement in a myriad of other things in the fire service. So why don't you give a little introduction to yourself for the folks who don't know you, but you are very well known amongst most of the circles we travel on.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's kind of surprising that somebody's paying attention to me, but I appreciate being here. Yeah, I retired from the Phoenix Fire Department in September of 22, just shy of 32 years. Finished up as a deputy chief, but had the great fortune to have the boss be my fire chief for the first 15 years of my career as a firefighter and as a company officer. And I'm really excited to be getting to hang out here in the blue card world and getting to be able to teach and be a part of this process. So it's pretty cool. I'm actually introducing blue card into a new organization in a smaller department. And so getting to see all sides of it. I appreciate you guys having me and let me hang out with you.
Well, it's fun hanging out with you, and we've been able to teach a number of classes already together. So it's really good now to have you on the podcast finally. So thanks for being here today. Our topic is risk management, and then we'll talk a little bit about the strategic decision-making model as we go along with this. But we want to kick this off with some excellent risk management because this is a department that has had some rescues before, and it's a rescue again, where they looked at all the critical fireground factors and also determined they needed to risk a lot to save a lot. So, Josh, tell us what we're going to listen to.
Yeah, so we're headed back to Cobb County, Georgia, and we're just going to hear a few pieces of this, really to just launch and kind of get us going on our whole topic for today. But dispatch reported building on fire, reported possible people trapped on dispatch, companies get in place, they get some hand lines in operation, known victim. From the audio, it sounds like there's a known victim also reported from a resident that's there on the scene at the building. So companies go into, rescue mode. They end up doing it like a vendor search into the building, and we'll listen to the audio. I mean, it's a perfect example of this didn't happen by accident, and it's clear that they practice what this would actually look like, not just talk about when we get there, that's just what we do, and we just make shit happen. So it doesn't happen by accident. There's training and procedures and guidelines and, support that all goes along with how this event went, just like the other ones that we've had on this podcast from Cobb County over the last, 15 or 16 months, the other rescues that we've already shared with people.
House fire, 3401 Bloomfield Avenue, 3401 Bloomfield Avenue. Advising it's a house fire possible, someone trapped inside the residence, 2 people trapped inside the residence. They're now advising these are duplexes.
Battalion 5 all units, upgrade to emergency.
Battalion 5, they're advising that these are duplexes and the house next door is fully involved. How do you advise?
5 all units respond emergency. Go ahead and balance this one.
All units be advised. Bystander does advise we do have somebody inside, possibly in a front bedroom. We've got fire coming out the back door as well.
Engine 6 on same 4.
Truck 22 is going to be VES on this alpha side, first floor.
Gas service is being cut off to both units.
Engine 22 command. We're on scene. We're trying to get a plug right now. 6 to command. I'm on a hydrant here at the far end of Cross Street. Battalion 1's on the scene. Battalion 1 to command.
Go ahead, Bat 1.
I have Allstel 1 on the alpha side. They're going to be fire control. I've got truck 22 doing VES on the alpha side. Engine 6 is going to be water supply. If that's correct, give me a can.
10-4, we got a victim coming out the alpha side. Most of the fire is going to be on the delta side of the structure. We have an Allstel unit on the Bravo exposure doing an interior search.
Command to last unit priority traffic, go ahead.
Truck 22, we got a victim coming out of the side, first floor. I didn't make the left side of the Stay on. Command clear. Command 2, rescue 2023. Can you do patient care? 23 is clear, patient care.
The biggest thing I wanted to hear with this is the dispatch, but then when that battalion one gets there, clearly gets a command transfer, figures out what's going on. They'd already committed, they had a handline operation. They'd already committed to that vent inner search for a known victim. And then right away, clearly the known victim was actually there because they could say, hey, we're coming out through the Alpha side. We need transport unit and cyano kit. So that's not the first time we've heard that either. And that doesn't happen by accident. They've talked about that and trained on that to have company officers thinking forward enough to say, this is what my need is. Because just like conditions, actions, need, well, the need is, in this case, we're coming out the Alpha side and I need a transport unit and make sure they got a cyano kit. So all makes sense. And there was a lot going on the front end of that. But when the battalion got there in that strategic position, did a command transfer, figured out exactly what was going on. And then they end up pulling that victim out, get a medic unit, forward to start patient care. Just I think a good example of the size up and evaluating the critical fire ground factors, what's really going on here. And what do we know versus what do we emotionally want to feel like we know or should do.
Well, on the front end of this, they certainly applied the risk management model. They were in the risk a lot to save a lot mode. They were in the green. And that's why they went ahead and ordered the VES on the front side of the building. They gave great TLOs so everybody knew exactly what their jobs were. They subdivided the work that needed to get done. Part of coming up with that risk management profile is using the strategic decision-making model, looking at the critical fire ground factors. And I think a lot of times when I start hearing people who are not familiar with Blue Card or Fire Command, they start talking about risk management as if it's risk adverse, which is certainly not the case with risk management. So let's dig into risk management and talk a little bit in depth about how we size that up and apply the risk management model to different incidents. And this one's a good example of it being applied successfully to save a life.
I think just starting off that, we've talked about it a lot. You can do so much more when you actually have an incident action plan and everybody's on the same page and you're making actual decisions because everybody is on the same page. It's not just get there and do something. So in this case, it was clearly all communicated. The incident action plan was over the radio of what was happening and what was going to happen and what the needs are. So, that's my little piece on that. And every time we listen to these, we hear the success from it. And John, I think part of it is that people just don't know what they don't know. And when they aren't comfortable with something, they just like to start, slinging shit around.
So I think the fantastic part of this is you have size up and risk-based actions taking place at this incident. You've got some legit fire conditions based on their description of fire on the Alpha side, fire out the front door. I think in the follow-up report or in the 360 report, you've got fire out the back door. So the two means of egress of this house have fire showing, which is very serious conditions. But then at the same time, you have information about a known rescue or clear information about there is a high likelihood of somebody in there. So then the action that's based on that is absolutely connected to the conditions and the position in the risk management plan, which obviously in this one they're willing to take a fairly high level of risk calculated way to deal with what they believe to be the savable the life based on that information. I think that's kind of like the purity of this system moving forward and the strength of it. And it's not just we're not just diving in windows to dive in windows.
So one thing with that whole strategic decision-making model and the risk management, there's so many parts to it. And really, it's everything that we do. And I say we do. It's the 8 functions of command and evaluation of critical fire ground factors and strategic decision-making model and how all that fits together. It's a system that all has to plug in. So in this case, it started with the whole resource thing. They had enough people to put water on the fire, and they had enough people to do a rescue, and they had a strategic command position established. And if we listen to it longer, when the next battalion got there, they put them in Alpha and gave them an assignment and said who was working where and what medic unit was going to be coming to them to assist and so on and so on. So risk management is a decision. You only get to that risk management thing through the whole decision-making process.
The connection of the reports from bystanders connected with what we know to be the conditions and what we know to be, what we're seeing on the front end is driving that. And really the important parts of the risk management plan are the savable lives or savable property. In this case, it's truly the savable life that's the action here, that's driving the action here, and their use of the system and their ability to actually communicate what they're thinking and sharing that information for everybody else on the fire ground really drastically improves how simple it was for them to execute a rescue. And I don't mean simple physically, but when you listen to the radio, they're just making the donuts like they normally do, and they're actually dealing with a legit rescue where they did a window initiated search.
I think the point Josh was making earlier too is it was all coordinated. It wasn't just everyone get inside and we're going to have pandemonium for the next 15 minutes while we do these willy-nilly searches. It was all coordinated through a single incident commander who was giving those orders and coordinating the all clears. We just came from a fire this week where the IC got there, and it was a newer home, attached, fully involved garage fire, getting into the house. The homeowner came out and said, I got to go to work, and just left. And it left the IC with this feeling like, what the hell's going on? Very seldom do we encounter that in our business, where somebody nonchalantly and cavalierly just says, hey, I'm going to go to work. You guys handle this. So he's like, I want to get an all clear right now because something suspicious is here. Now, luckily, nothing was going on, but that alone was enough to increase that IC suspicion that I do for sure want to make sure we have an all clear, even though the livable spaces in the house were not involved, and we ended up keeping the fire from there. But that's just a good example of that IC had seen that before, had heard that before, had encountered at some point either a story or he encountered it himself where somebody was kind of suspicious because they bailed out right away. So what is going on? Is there other sets? Is there some reason this fire is going? So luckily that was all cleared up, but that's why we have our ICs make good decisions at these incidents, and why we have them practice doing it. So they've done it before, even if it hasn't been on an actual incident. They've simulated it, and they know where they're going to go when they're making those decisions.
So it sounds to me like, because of the coordination that you both are talking about, because it was well communicated, everybody understood, accountability became a really, really simple thing at a very high risk, in a very high risk portion of this incident. So the IC has the ability to know and understand what's happening, and then know and understand who's doing what on the fire ground. It drastically improves not only the outcome, but it drastically improves the firefighter safety there, and knowing and understanding that.
So when do we start to get in the yellow? Just for the folks who aren't maybe necessarily 100% informed on the risk management model, or if they need a refresher on it, when do we go from that? We're going in, we're gonna take the high level of risk to save savable property and lives, to we're going to take the moderate risk? Because I think that's the one that starts to trip people up.
We developed the strategic decision-making model about the second edition of Fire Command was pretty much finished. And if you go back to those days, is everything like an incident action plan was designed around, in priority, life safety, fire control, and property conservation. At that point, I was the battalion chief, and I had been one for a few years, and I was having trouble making sense of the way we did incident action planning. And so we're teaching tactics, and we would use the same incident action plan for every structure fire. They all started off the same way, as you had to search the building for life. And that didn't make sense to me. It's most of the fires I went to, you could tell this is a fire that would have people in it. This is one that wouldn't. It's a vacant commercial building. It's this, it's that. So, and the students would ask questions about that. Why do we treat these all the same? Like they're a nursing home. You couldn't answer questions. I don't know. To give any potential victims the best chance. And you think there's not going to be any victims in this. Why are we doing this? So we started screwing around with size up and incident action planning. And over a period of, I don't know, it was a few months, we had done this in enough training settings that it started to get some traction. So we started to look at it of terms of, no, we're going to, when we get to the scene, we need to do a size up of the building that's currently on fire. And Josh said it when he started off, not on our emotional feelings of the threat of fire on the country, which we all like glom to. Oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z when the building catches on fire. Well, if there's no life and the building's not worth anything, why are we doing that? So I had sat in front of enough buildings that were going to burn to the ground when we got there to say, well, there's nothing left to save in this thing. So I guess to get to your yellow question, is you incident action plan based on the critical factors. If we look at the thing that started this, they began their response with the rescue. As it was dispatched, somebody's trapped. Oh, okay. You get to the scene and then there's people on the scene, responsible parties that come out and say, there's people trapped. That's where they're at. The butt slip that we put out this week, there's a story from Washington, same thing happened. And they were doing a 360 and had that same knowledge that somebody's trapped, so they're doing the initial size up. Well, in the 360, they get to the back of the building, and that's where they see the responsible party. They say, yeah, my kid's trapped in that room right there. Well, because they got to the scene and were doing the size up is the reason they found out about where the victim was. If they wouldn't have done the 360, they wouldn't have known about the victim. So the yellow piece of that is, in absence of those reports, let's say you get to a dollar store at 3 a.m. Well, you're in the yellow now. I don't have a report of any victims trapped. There's not normally people in these buildings at 3 a.m. So this is what this looks like. You know, there's even harder decisions to make. Let's say they get to the thing and it's fully involved. There's fire coming out of every window. And they said, yeah, there's people in there. Well, you're in the yellow, whether you want to agree that you're going to go in and do what you can once you knock fire down to search for any possible victims. But we respond to a lot of fires where we get there and the victims are dead when we got there. They're not savable. I mean, so when we show up, it's just is based on when we get called for the incident. I don't know that response time's got to be factored into that. So if there's people trapped and it takes you 10 minutes to get there, what's the status when you get there? You may have to do some firefighting in order to do a search at that point. If we get reports that there's people inside the building, we will do everything in our power to get those people out. If we have to knock down the fire for 10 minutes before we do it, but then we kind of start to say, well, based on this set of conditions, here's the likely outcome of this incident. So, I mean, what you're doing is you're managing around the critical factors. So really, you customize a response based on what's going on at the time, the reality. So, but as far as risk management being something that somehow is supposed to restrain us from doing fire attack, that people don't understand what risk management is. Then that's not it at all. But you were going to match where you physically position yourselves in that workforce based on those incident conditions. So if you got a building, a big ass commercial building where the roof's getting ready to collapse on it, I wouldn't suggest putting people underneath it. That's probably not a very smart thing to do for whatever reason you want to do that. It makes no difference. When the roof collapses, everybody that's underneath is going to be dead. That's what risk management is. Is it is it starts to make sense out of natural laws like gravity and thermodynamics and the rest of it. And say you can't expose an unprotected human body to a flashover and expect it to survive. It doesn't. There's a huge risk to being stuck in a flashover with no protective gear. Death. It's just the reality. Jump into a wood chipper and you're going to be pink pulp at the end. We're not going to go in and do a right-hand wall search in the limb shredder to look for you. It's a flashover is kind of the same thing. Sorry, but that's the reality.
It comes back to the emotional thing, though, right? I mean, for some reason, when something's on fire, people want to get this emotional attachment to it, or it's what I do, or I have to feel good about it, or whatever. And it's like, Nick, you said it. We're going to do everything we can to save savable lives, and the risk management thing. And we've talked about this before too. There's nothing wrong with getting into the cage with a house cat, but I'm not going to get into a cage with a lion.
No.
Well, it's the same thing. It's lining up all those critical factors, right? Well, the critical factors is I'm not too worried about the house cat, but I'm not getting in a cage with the lion that's going to eat me for sure, right? Well, I can do a lot of things at a building when there's survivable space, and that I can control the fire, and I got lines in place and so on. So it's not just the jumping through the window, like was said before. A bigger question, I think, when we get there in the beginning is a challenge, but I think the harder thing, and the thing that we miss way too often too, is how do you go when do we go from green to yellow at the building fire when we were doing the search? So when does that change? I know we talk about it a lot in Blue Card, and that's the priority thing of getting those objectives checked off. So, when you have all clears and all of that, but that seems to be a big difficulty that, 30 minutes into the event, we're still doing the same thing we were doing in the first 5 minutes of the event. And we shouldn't be doing that. So what does that look like when we're going from green to yellow?
I think once we get in a building generally, and you operate that building, 99% of the time you have eliminated the hazard because you're in the building physically operating. The more we can operate inside places, that says, okay, the critical factors are of such a thing that we're going to put the fire out successfully. During my career, I didn't get to a lot of things where I was like, oh, I'm worried about their safety now, and we haven't gotten all clear on it. It's like, When we get in, and I'm going to go back to the Cobb County deal, the Georgia thing. Once they started putting water on that fire and knocking it down, they figured out it's not the front and the back burning, it's the delta end or wherever it was. And we've got so a little water application went a long way in figuring out, okay, this is where our problem is. And the fire control piece of it, in both this example you used and the thing that ran in the buck slip the other day, was made possible by the fire attack. So if you got people in stage offensive conditions, the best thing you can do for them is put the fire out. Period. Start with that, and then you have to coordinate a search in it. And that becomes a very active, risky operation, I'm going to say. When you're inside a burning building with an out-of-control fire and you're rescuing people, that's kind of that's a yee-haw thing to do. And you guys all said it going into it, is the reason this worked out is because they had figured it out before they responded to it and said, this is a better way to do this. Risk management, Fire Command is the system that started risk management. NIMS had nothing to do with risk management or strategic decision-making or critical factors or any of that. NIMS is an org chart for a huge operation that includes airplanes. That's what NIMS is. Nothing will replace NIMS if you're flying airplanes and you got 1,000 firefighters that are going to be there for 3.5 months. That's what it's for. If you're doing episodic type 4 and 5 local incident operations, you're going to do Blue Card because that takes place in an IDLH. NIMS wasn't designed for people to operate in an IDLH. It was designed to keep the fire from spreading into good property by using airplanes dropping water on it. That's there's some risk management for you. You can't even, the insurance industry would cook and go away forever if they had to make sense of the risk management involved in that. It's too episodic. It's too far out of their wheelhouse. The fire service manages risk management a little different than the insurance industry does. You guys said it to start this. Most people, firefighters, when you say risk management, they think, oh, this is some safety division thing to keep us from getting our gear dirty. If you want to do dangerous firefighting operations, manage them better. You can get a lot deeper and do a lot more crazy shit if you'll just manage it and exercise it. I mean, it's like special operations then. Generally, doing that inside a burning building, the riskier it gets. We'll go back to the Home Depot that we talked about a couple podcasts ago, where it had its own weather system inside the store. It's not an offensive firefight anymore. When the water comes out of the 2.5-inch nozzle and it just turns to steam, that's a sign that you should probably have a PAR outside pretty quick. There's risk management. Yeah. So that's kind of what it is. It is really base your actions on the reality that's taking place at the fire you're operating at today.
To me, that these departments are the same ones that aren't using the strategic decision-making model and risk management when they're giving their assignments, or worse yet, they're just doing SOP-driven assignments where the first engine does whatever they do and the second engine does whatever they do. As you got to look at deployment, that's part of the risk management model, because depending on what resources you're getting is going to be dependent on what tasks you can do and just how aggressive you can get.
Well, Vance, I think also to answer your question about risk management and the yellow and all the other stuff is historically, I worked almost 30 years for a fire department that was very well known for the risk management. During the course of my career, personally, of the fires I responded to, I'm going to say that 95% of them, at least at a minimum, began in the offensive and ended in the offensive strategy, right? So that was risk management for the Phoenix Fire Department from 1980 to 2009, is we're going to get to the scene as quickly as possible, and we are going to roll our eyes back in our head, and we're going to attack the fire. That's kind of was our mindset. So a bunch of juvenile B shifters where there was a few adults sprinkled within that would every now and then hit us and say, stop it. But that's what risk management looked like. And so I would go out on in America, and you would interact with other firefighters, and they would have questions about risk management. And because I started in 1980, and it wasn't uncommon then that some of them still didn't wear SCBAs. And so they're telling me how much braver they are because they don't wear a mask. Now, they're telling this story to a juvenile who used to, it's just sport, try to craze their mask. I would look at them funny and think, you have to manage what you're doing. If you don't manage it, you're going to lose everything. Josh has said it. There's two kinds of fire departments, ones that are doing blue card and ones that are going to do it eventually. Because if you respond to enough fires and you don't manage yourself, eventually you are going to have a very seriously bad day that turns into a week and a month and a year. As a good friend of mine used to say, you have to know sin to fight it. We were unsafe often enough to know when to control people being unsafe. So that's kind of the beauty of the fire service is your lessons are instant.
Another thing I've been a part of is when things just don't match up. And I know, Nick, you've had fires like this. Josh, Chris, you probably have too, where either you're the incoming IC, your IC number 2 pulling up in your buggy, or you're getting can reports from the inside and they're telling you, hey, I've got it. Everything's looking great here. Meanwhile, you've got a column of fire coming out of the center of the building that's 30 feet high. And you're saying, no, you don't. There's something obviously amiss and it just doesn't line up. So we're gonna reset this puppy and we're getting everybody out. Or you've got some, when you pull up as IC number 2 and you've got an aggressive attack going on by IC number 1, and you've got to immediately go to the red and say we're risking nothing to save nothing. So let's talk about making that transition when we finally have to change strategies and get into the red zone.
Well, we have to get out of this mindset of this recreational activity we call firefighting. I mean, we all do this for the same reason, but if they're going to tear the building down tonight, we got to quit screwing around with it. Like, what are we really doing? And it comes back to that, evaluating the critical fire ground factors and what's really going on. But because we got away with something one time, or we haven't experienced it ourselves, we just keep on doing some of the same stupid things. As a good friend of ours always says, ask anybody that has had significant injury or not come back to work as a fireman if they would do the same thing to create that event that caused them not to come back to work or that changed their life forever. And they would say no. And I mean, that's Grant Light from Cincinnati Fire Department, been involved in all kinds of events. And he says that all the time. But that's that whole thing of we have to stop. But as the adult, that boss, that's the strategic IC, it's up to us to make those decisions. But I think before that even happens, that we have to put that expectation out and train and have that discussion of everybody being on the same page with how the incident goes and how the organization is built and what risk management really is, as Nick has said, because risk management, as soon as you throw that out, people are like, oh, the safety police are here. And it's like, it has nothing to do with that, really. It's making good, sound decisions. And I'm going to say it again, not emotional decisions, which we see way too often. Because when we make emotional decisions, we are not being professionals.
No. Vance, I'm going to go back to your yellow thing. One night, we show up to a fire, and it's a fire in a fabric store. And this building, it's sandwiched between two other buildings, and it can't be any bigger than 2,500 square feet. It just can't be. And this thing is putting off more smoke than a 50,000 square foot building ought to. So there's like 2 engines, a ladder, and they're just starting the operation. And you could say it's still offensive conditions if you want to. There's not a lot of fire showing, just a lot of nasty black hot smoke. So we get there, we transfer command, talk to the companies that are on the inside, get a CAN report, and they all are basically mumbling the same thing. Hot, 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 ventilate, ventilate, ventilate. Can't find anything, yada, yada, yada. So what we do is we leave it offensive, but we say, you guys back your lines out for just a minute. And then the ladder's there, and we had them ventilate the roof. It said, ladder, open up the roof so we get this smoke out and we get those lines in, and then we put this thing out. Well, guess what happened after ladder 20 opened their hole? Man, that son of a bitch took off. I mean, just blowtorching. Now all the black smoke is replaced with fire. And nobody at the incident scene would say offensive. If you pulled them. If you pulled them from Worcester, they wouldn't have said offensive. It was a defensive fire. And you could see little tears running down the cheeks at that point. Except in the command post, we were rolling on the floor. Is here we go. Let's put some ladder pipes in it and some stain guns. And that goddamn 2,500 square foot clothing store burned for at least 3 more hours, despite about, 6,000, 7,000 GPM going on it. Burned all night long. Defensive fire. And, after we put it out, the next day, they scraped the thing and they built another fabric store there. So there's another one right there. It was right next to a cell tower, as I remember. And that cell tower was powerful enough to completely destroy the radios. We had to use pigeons to communicate, hand signals, shrieking people, foghorns. It was horrible. But it all worked out well in the end. We went from yellow to red. Now, let's say that the fire attack would have knocked the fire down in the first couple minutes. We may have gone back to green at that point and said, no, we'll go in and finish the thing off. There may have been savable property. You just didn't know. But by the time the critical factors played out, Vance, it was too late. It was too little too late. which is oftentimes the case with manual fire suppression. It's an imperfect world where you call 911 and we respond.
What's the next step? What's once you know about that risk management, what's the next step for your department in order to educate your people to manage it?
We did a thing. We used to do BCDC meetings a million years ago, and we had a string of fires and bowstrung commercial buildings with bowstrung roofs. And then one day, a bowstrung complex, it was a big ass strip mall with a series of big bowstrung roofs, just collapsed at night. It wasn't on fire. It was just a roof. Second longitudinal crack in the bottom core to the second truss from the alpha front of the building. Whole thing, the whole building collapsed. So the ops chief had pictures taken of he had pictures for the last 10 buildings that had bowstrungs that burned, and then this building that collapsed. So he starts off with the building that collapsed and said, this just happened, last week at 27th Avenue and Glen Rosa, yada, yada, yada. And so he goes through the whole thing, and then he shows us the fires. And he says, you guys are the chiefs, and when you get there, you need to manage this like it's the yellow. And I raised my hand at the time and I said, excuse me, you started off and said these goddamn buildings aren't safe to shop in on our days off. And now you want us to make decisions of what we're going to do when they're on fire. If they're all going to fall down like that, they're all defensive then, right? Well, then you have a bunch of chiefs arguing about strategy and tactics and the rest of it. So but you couldn't make sense of the thing. You're like, well, either we're not going to go in them or we're going to go in them, or what's the breakover? So I think that's the thing that we struggle with as a service, is knowing when it goes from, okay, we should be inside to no, we shouldn't be inside anymore. And you said it, there's too many different variables that affect that. And some of them have to do with the fire department. Some fire departments don't have the staffing to do it in the front end. NFPA 1700 standards written around a fire in a 2,000 square foot, 2-story house. 17 people you got to have. Well, now we're porting that to fires in Amazon warehouses. Well, that's not. No, you need a sprinkler system in that. And then you need a bunch of people showing up that understand how all that works. So you could go to school forever to be a tactician in the fire service. In fact, in Europe, that's what you do. In Germany, you got to be an engineer to be an IC. So see, they inject some reality into it, some architecture, some physics. This is how these systems go together.
Chris, you have any other thoughts on this topic?
No, I do think that the process is super important for that transition from IC number 1 to IC number 2. And it's all about perspective. And Nick talks about it multiple times, is that perspective of risk management and the perspective of the conditions. The closer you get to it, the more skewed and screwed up it becomes. And so when you may think you're winning, and I've been on both sides of inside going, yeah, we've got this thing, and the IC outside going, no, you don't. And then being that IC arriving on the outside and saying, yeah, this isn't as optimistic as you think it is, and we need to make a change, is that IC number 2, and having that ability to reevaluate those conditions based from that stepped back 30,000 foot view, I guess, if you will, to be able to figure out, all right, are the conditions still match where we started out in this risk management plan, and what do we need to change? And that's when that communication and switch from that green to yellow makes a ton of sense, or from yellow to red that's where it's going to happen. And that IC number 2 role is hugely important in that.
When we're in green, we still believe that we have a life safety issue. And once we are confident or feel like, once we have all clears and there's no life safety issue, we are no longer in green. So, that starts a whole new process. And we constantly revisit the strategic decision-making model anyway, or we should be, but we just can't keep throwing people at it doing the same thing. So, yeah, green is still the life safety. And when we go to yellow, we're still thinking that we're going to save property. But Nick said it earlier, if this whole building is going through the dump, then we shouldn't even be in the yellow. We should be in the red. We go through and we make decisions, and we want to be intelligent about it, not just one size fits all.
Well, I think that's the ultimate risk management question, is what is there left to save? That's really what risk management is what's left to save and how much will I risk myself to save that? That's really kind of what it looks like. Well, if you can get there and you can immediately put the fire out and control that, then you said it, that you go from green to green to green to, okay, it's safe to go out again. We restore the safety of the community. We break the hose up and we go back to the station after that. I mean, that's kind of the way the thing's supposed to work. For me, I worked in an urban place, so you got called a lot earlier to the call. So you had a lot more opportunity to be offensive just because of where you lived and worked. I would get to places, the biggest threat was being run over by another fire truck or having another group of firefighters try to steal your shit. So, I mean, our deployment capability, we could do goofy shit. And in fact, my old man used to say it. He says, why is it that the only people that do stupid shit have the most firefighters? And he used to say, before you should buy a ladder truck, you should have to pass an IQ test. They shouldn't just let you buy those. There's too many things that can go wrong. So, and you're thinking, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's we're spoiled that way. It's like I get to play football with 11 against teams that only have 3. I mean, that's kind of was the joy of working where we worked at the time.
Do the ladder guys take that IQ test, Nick?
Well, you could start with them, but I think maybe their bosses first, then them. I worked on one for long enough to know. See, we can cheat still. I mean, there's not a test they could make that we couldn't pass, given enough time to study for it. Study for it. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right, things continue to develop at the Alan V. Brunacini Command Training Center in Phoenix at 818 East Osborne, and it's a really cool building. Hopefully everyone gets a chance, if you haven't already, to go and check it out and do some learning there. Part of the real magic of the place is the motif on the inside. I mean, it's got Engine 1 in there. It's got a great classroom. Got a kitchen. We've got an area that really is reminiscent of a firehouse. And then the lobby, we are lining all of the blue card departments in there with their helmets. So if you're a blue card department and you have a helmet with your shield that you can send us, we'll include that information where you can send it to in the show notes. We will proudly display that in our lobby, and we'll send you a little memento for sending that to us.
Like you said, Vance, we had a sea can full of my dad's memorabilia, the stuff he collected over the course of his life. So he had about, 24 fire helmets in there. And we took them out and we were figuring out what to do with them. And the one place they would fit was in the lobby because it's 2 stories. So you go straight up with it. So we put the first row in and thought, wow, that looks good. This thing would look good if we filled it up full of fire helmets. So that's one of the reasons it's good to be us, because we know a lot of people that have fire helmets that they could send us. So that's our goal, is blue card departments. The lobby of the building is going to be full of helmets. So, and that's mojo. So there's like Holy Spirit that's in that.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to this Bee Shifter. If you have any comments for any of us, or you'd like to get a hold of either Nick, Chris, Josh, or myself, our contacts in the show notes. Until next time, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening. Josh's dogs say so, too.